Hi, I'm Connor Jones.
I'm Micah Tomasella.
And this is Culture Brief, a Dennis-informed podcast where we navigate the constant stream of top stories in news, politics, sports, pop culture, and technology. And we're doing it all from a Christian perspective. Micah, we have got a jam-packed show today, so why don't you just give us a quick rundown of what we're going to be hitting on?
Yeah, Connor. So we're going to be talking about Israel, Iran, U.S. strikes, and a ceasefire. We're going to dive deep into the mailbag and go over some questions and some comments that we've gotten from our awesome listeners. What is your favorite casual dining chain, Connor? New York City's mayor's race, and so much more. So let's jump into The Brief.
The Brief.
All right, so Israel, Iran, U.S. strikes, and a ceasefire, a shaky ceasefire that we're in right now. So we're recording this episode on Wednesday, June 25th. This will be released on Thursday, June 26th. So this is the most up-to-date information that we have. So let's set the stage. So this is the main story that we're going to be breaking down today, but let's set the stage for what this is, and then I'll pass it off to Connor. So they're calling this the 12-day Israel-Iran war. People will call it different things, but in theory, if this ceasefire stays, it'll be a 12-day war from June 13th to June 24th. It started on June 13th when Israel launched a surprise high-intensity strike on Iran's nuclear and military sites, Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. These weren't just warning shots. Israeli warplanes reportedly used deep penetration bombs and electronic warfare to bypass the Iranian defenses. Multiple top commanders were killed, including generals who had just taken the post that morning. The message was loud and clear: Israel isn't going to be playing any kind of defense. They're going to take the offensive. So we broke this down a lot last week, but a lot has happened even since then with this story. So Iran hit back fast. Over the next week, they fired more than 400 drones and ballistic missiles towards Israel, and most were intercepted by the Iron Dome there in Israel and their aero systems, especially with the help of the U.S., but some still made it through. There was still some damage. So here's where the human cost came. On the Israeli side, 29 people were killed, 12 soldiers and 17 civilians so far. That number might be rising. They're still searching through the rubble of some destroyed apartment buildings. And over 300 were injured, including dozens from rocket strikes that hit residential areas in Tel Aviv and Beersheba. The attacks triggered mass evacuations. They were saying, you can't gather together, you can't go to work, you've got to stay sheltered in place. Schools and airports shut down. It was the most direct, large-scale attack on Israeli soil since the Yom Kippur War. Then the U.S. got involved, which was kind of the big question that we broke down last week, and that changed everything. Not just diplomatically, though, but militarily, under the code name Operation Midnight Hammer, which we have to admit, no matter if you agree with this or not, that's a great name. American B-2 bombers and guided missiles were used to strike Iranian nuclear sites. U.S. officials say they crippled parts of Iran's enrichment capacity, and then they damaged underground centrifuge facilities. Trump said the goal was to cripple Iran's ability to escalate further. American forces also helped intercept missile attacks and reinforced U.S. bases in the region. One close call came when an Iranian missile, Connor, landed near a U.S. base in Qatar. No American casualties, but the warning was loud enough. Trump responded with a clear threat: hit one of ours, we'll hit back. The surprise came in Iran's response. For all the warnings of the massive regional war, especially from MAGA skeptics like Tucker Carlson, it didn't happen. The dire predictions of thousands of U.S. troops killed in the first week have not materialized, thank God. Mm-hmm. Even Biden's former Middle East envoy, Brett McGurk, publicly praised the outcome. This was interesting. I was actually watching CNN that night. You're thinking, wow, Micah, you're watching cable news in the evening? Yeah, guys, I'm weird. By the end of the 12 days, Israel had destroyed dozens of Iranian missile batteries, radar stations, command posts. Iran suffered heavy losses compared to Israel. Over 600 killed, including senior commanders in its nuclear program, did take a serious hit. It's debated what it is, but it definitely took a serious hit. But Israel paid a price too. Dozens dead, hundreds wounded, cities disrupted, and a population that's living on edge. Connor, before I jump into the ceasefire agreement, any thoughts on this breakdown? Anything I missed?
Yeah, well, it was a lot. I mean, since we recorded last week, so much happened.
I know.
So thank you for breaking all that down. There was a lot of information. But the one thing I'm thinking about is also Iran's missile attack that they responded with, where they tried to attack a U.S. base in Qatar. It was very limited, and it was on purpose. And they warned the U.S. ahead of time.
They warned Qatar and the U.S.
They did not want to hit the U.S. base. No. They did not want to cause a casualty because they knew that would bring such big consequences. It's like they had to respond to show some face after being hit by the U.S. secretly. They had to do something, and say something, but they were like, we don't really want to, but we're going to shoot a few missiles towards a U.S. base just to show face. But we really would rather not injure any American soldiers because that would spill into a much bigger problem.
Obviously, Connor, that's a great point. I mean, Iran's missile capability was drained by more than 50% through several reports. And so their ability to fight a multi-front war, fighting Israel is one thing. Going against the United States is an entirely different thing. But, I think about that type of response that Iran had, where they dropped the same amount of missiles or shot the same amount of missiles at a U.S. base, even though they warned Qatar and then warned the United States beforehand. They dropped the same amount of bombs that the U.S. dropped on their nuclear facilities as, retaliation. You can't just attack us without anything happening. Well, that's only going to work to be able to save face in a country like Iran, where the media landscape is so controlled by the government and by the regime, where they can completely control the narrative of what their response was to their people. I'm very thankful, even in a moment like this, to live in a free country. No matter what we all disagree on, we are able to access information from all sides and make our own judgment. Iran gets to do that and then push the narrative to their people that they defended themselves in a strong way, when all reality they did not at all.
True. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yep. So the ceasefire, let's talk about that. So Trump's secret play here, and then what's going to come next. So then out of nowhere, Trump dropped the hammer again, but this time it was, I'm saying hammer because of Operation Midnight Hammer, but he dropped a diplomacy hammer this time. So on June 23rd, he announced a phased ceasefire agreement brokered through Qatar. What most people didn't know at the time was that secret meetings had already been happening for days. So just like Operation Midnight Hammer, there was a lot of misdirection and how it was played out, and Connor's about to break that down. The diplomacy part, there was a lot of misdirection and a lot of things that people didn't know about. So Trump's senior team worked with the Qatari prime minister, Israeli intelligence reps, and then the Iranian intermediaries, meeting behind closed doors, specifically in Turkey. Iran refused to meet directly, but Qatar played the go-between, passing proposals back and forth. So the deal went live hours after Trump posted on his social media website, Truth Social. Israel began winding down airstrikes. Iran then halted missile launches. There were a few violations, a rocket here, we're going to bomb you there. But, that alone showed how seriously, the ceasefire did stick, was that it was immediately tested. And then, we're going on close to 48 hours at this point where the fighting has stopped. But as of June 25th, the day of recording, the truce is still holding, though it's shaky. This is just a ceasefire. This isn't an ironed out peace deal. It could change at any moment. It seems to be a win for Trump, and his supporters are letting everyone know it right now. But here's the catch. Iran may be down, but it's not done. Experts believe Tehran still holds a sizable stockpile of enriched uranium, and it likely does have centrifuges hidden from international inspectors, so ones that we might know about, or maybe not all of them were damaged after the U.S. bombed these facilities. We're not really going to know the answer on that just yet. There's a real concern that this conflict only reinforced the regime's belief that the only true security that they have lies in them making a bomb and making it quickly. But at the very least, the U.S. and Israel made it very difficult for them to take that into their own hands moving forward. So Trump is using this momentum to revive a long-stalled peace push in Gaza. So he's trying to parlay this into a peace deal in Gaza. Earlier this year, the U.S. floated a 6-week ceasefire deal that we talked about that included hostage releases by Hamas, humanitarian aid to civilians, and space for negotiations. That proposal, unfortunately, has stalled, and there's been issues with all of that, with the hostages being released, with those in Gaza being able to get access to food and to aid. It's a tough situation there right now. It's a very bad situation there. But now with Israel and Iran temporarily off the battlefield, maybe Trump can kind of set up his eyes on something here and his team. So now we wait. The airstrikes did bring time. It bought some time. The ceasefire brought leverage. The question is whether Iran, whether this can actually lead to something lasting in Iran and Israel and in Gaza, or if this is just a brief pause before the next, big issue. So there you go.
Yeah, hopefully this is the first step towards some sort of peace. I don't think Iran and Israel will ever sign a peace agreement.
Yeah. It's definitely something. It's definitely something to reset the region. How we've been reading this could at least reset some terms, reset some things, realign some things in the Middle East.
I could picture this being a North Korea, South Korea thing where it's they're never really at peace, but they're able to exist next to each other because they've determined
that's probably best case scenario.
Basically, mutual
yeah.
destruction is a possibility, so they just don't bother each other that much.
Unless there's a different
each other.
Yeah, like unless there's just a complete ideological regime change in Iran, probably the best case scenario for Israel and Iran is that they would just not like each other, hate each other, but from afar. Leave each other alone.
Regime change is something that a lot of people have talked about. Like, was that an end goal of this whole thing? And a lot of people were worried that the U.S. was going to try to install a new leader and cause regime change.
Well, I mean, Trump threatened it, and then he pulled it back.
He did, because a lot of people are not about that. That's what we've done in past wars and in past countries, and it's rarely that big of a success.
That's a much more involved process, too.
Yeah, maybe the people rise up and install regime change on their own. That would be a very interesting thing to see, but we'll just have to see how this all plays out. Anyways, let's detail Operation Midnight Hammer, which I agree with you, Micah, is a great name. Whether you agree with the strike or not, it does sound like a book that you'd pull off an airport shelf to read on the plane, right? Like,
no doubt.
Operation Midnight Hammer.
I know.
Like,
I'm all into that.
Yeah. Anyways, so the entire operation took a total of 37 hours. It was green lighted, like you said, a few days before, but it included 125 aircraft, 13 of those being the B-2 stealth bombers. A submarine was involved as well that launched missiles, and obviously quite a bit of deception here. So, like you said, the actual mission was to destroy those 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, Natanz, Isfahan, and the big one, Fordow. That's the one that is hundreds of feet underground that they needed bunker buster bombs that only the U.S. had that could only be flown by these B-2 stealth bombers. And so that's what Israel was dependent upon, and much of the world was hoping secretly, even if they weren't saying so publicly, that Trump was going to employ to destroy that bunker. Anyways, 7 of those B-2 bombers carried 14 of those bunker buster bombs, and they dropped them on the sites in a kind of a 25-minute window. It was early morning hours in Iran. It was like 1 to 2:30 a.m. over there, so it was in the middle of the night, in the dark, and struck them while they were all asleep. That was about 6:40 p.m. Eastern, so it was kind of right in prime time here on Saturday night. So obviously got a lot of people to stop in their tracks, check out what was going on. Trump was able to deliver his nationwide address that night. A lot of the country tuned in for that. At the same time, as those B-2s were dropping the bombs, we did have the submarine launch 24 Tomahawk missiles that were assisting in the strikes to kind of like help take out some other elements of those facilities. Prior to entering the Iranian airspace, the aircraft did cut off their communications to avoid detection. That's one of the things about these B-2 bombers is, man, they are stealth, and they look like it too. Like, they're so cool looking, and they're also huge, and they also cost $1 billion a piece. The most expensive planes in the world.
$1 billion a pop.
Yeah. So
we only have like 14, right?
We have 20. We used to have 21. One crashed in 2008, big loss. And then a few others have been decommissioned because they've had small damages that aren't even worth the repairs because that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
So 14 we're using this. We don't know exactly how many there are still active, but obviously 14 at least. Actually, I think
most of them. Total. At least most of them were, because half of them were used for the decoy and then half of them were used to carry out the mission, right?
You are absolutely correct. Yeah. So, again, these are just impressive aircraft, impressive pilots. They are the cream of the crop of the Air Force pilots that it is extremely hard to become a B-2 pilot or crew member. So, that being said, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said that the stealth aircraft got in and out and back without the world knowing at all. Micah, that is just crazy to me that these aircraft just went across the world, entered Iranian airspace, dropped these bombs, and got out without anybody knowing.
Unbelievable,
right? Also just a testament to the Israeli Air Force going ahead for the 10 days prior and eliminating a bunch of the air defenses and radars and communications facilities in Iran. They basically paved the way, knowing that if they did that, maybe the U.S. would enter, and that's ultimately what happened. The mission details were closely held by officials in the Pentagon and the White House and any troops that were on a need-to-know basis. Otherwise, nobody knew about this. This was top-secret planning. There were no leaks, which is a big deal, especially after Signalgate. I'm assuming Signal was not used to actually share any details of this operation this time around because that could be a leaking spot. But there were no leaks. It was all held close and tight, although Trump apparently caused some people a lot of nervousness because he kept saying things publicly that were potentially alerting the Iranians to something happening. But he also did his part by coming out and saying he's going to make a decision in 2 weeks. And that made everybody think, okay, he's not doing it now. He's going to wait. He's going to hold off, hope for negotiations, and see what happens from there. Once it was fully approved, Trump approved on Wednesday. Then he gave the final approval on Saturday night, a few hours before when communications had to be shut off. then everything started to take place. The 13 total B-2s took off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Like you said, Micah, there were some that went for the strikes. They went east towards and over the Atlantic towards Iran to do the strikes with the bombs. And then 6 of them went west over the Pacific. And those 6 were on radar. There were open source intelligence and flight trackers, including a lot of accounts that I follow, that were showing this basically fleet of tankers and then these B-2s going west. And the Pentagon did that on purpose. They wanted the world to be duped into believing that those were the 6 bombers that would be potentially used in a strike on Iran. And so everyone was like, okay, they're headed to either Guam or the little island in the Indian Ocean called Diego Garcia, which is a base that we've housed B-2s at for strikes previously in Middle East wars. And so that got a lot of people believing, okay, those are the bombers. And then even some officials came out and told Reuters that, yes, we are sending them. Those B-2 bombers are being relocated to the Pacific island of Guam as the president considers potential military action against Iran. So basically they were making it seem like they were just going to be staged, ready to do a strike whenever the timing was right and whenever they were green lighted. Yeah, that duped the world, man. That duped Iran, duped everybody. Everybody was just really taken off by that. And because of that, the strikes that actually happened came as a complete surprise to everyone, which is just, again, a big testament to the military pulling this off, including the pilots who did an incredibly difficult task. They flew 37 hours straight. They refueled with KC-135 air tankers across the Pacific for the decoys, but also the Atlantic for the actual bombers, and dozens of those tanker planes were involved. How do they pull this off? I was like, how are they flying for 37 straight hours? I did not know this. These B-2 bombers have little toilets, they have a little bunk, and they've got a little microwave. So these guys are living in like a little tiny plane apartment situation, but without like much space. I mean, it sounds very claustrophobic. I could not do it, so I'm just amazed by these guys. They train their bodies.
Yeah.
They train their bodies big time to be able to take on these 37 to 40 hour straight flights. And obviously all the tankers involved and all the crew members involved and the people who prep the weapons and the bombs, everything. Just amazing stuff. Micah, what are your initial thoughts on this whole operation?
Man, just you highlighted all of them. I don't really have much to add other than, you just got to tip your cap to the best military in the world. If I'm ever going to get flack for saying something like that, I mean, I love this country and I think that we're the best in so many things. And I'm just so grateful for that. And it's also just given me like Top Gun Maverick vibes. I know that Connor probably was going to say the same thing just because we're such big Top Gun fans. But this is just, these guys probably trained forever, never knew if they'd be able to do something like this. And so just if you're thinking about the singular mission, really cool, very well executed. God bless our troops.
Yeah, no kidding. You may not even agree with the strike, but what you cannot deny is that this was top of the top proficiency from the military and the Air Force and all involved from the Pentagon all the way down to everybody on the tarmacs that was involved. There were a bunch of fighter jets too. I didn't even mention that they escorted the B-2s into Iranian airspace. So there were a bunch of pilots probably in F-18s, F-16s.
Ready to defend the B-2s. Yeah.
They were ready to just take fire basically and pull fire away from the B-2s because
not one shot fired from the Iranians.
One shot fired.
Because they didn't know they were there.
They had no idea, man. It's just crazy. Testament to the technology too, man. Stealth stuff is just cool. F-35s, B-2s, B-1s, all of them. Yeah, U.S. military is number one in the world. I was going to make the Top Gun Maverick reference because I just thought this mission is very similar.
That's the first thing I thought of. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just this extremely small target. They got to hit it just right, get in and out. Of course, didn't have all the Hollywood production to it. But anyways, were these strikes, Micah, constitutional? That's a big question mark. A lot of people have been asking this week. Okay, yeah, maybe they were a success. We got in and out without any damage, but can the president technically do this? I want to just point this out because I've seen both sides, and I'm not a legal expert, but I've been reading what a lot of legal experts have been saying.
Yeah.
Here's what I've come to the conclusion of. Article 1 of the Constitution says Congress is the branch that has the power to declare war. We've seen this before. Congress voted to declare war against Germany and Japan in the 1940s, and we've seen that since then. But Article 2 says the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and that allows presidents essentially to initiate limited military actions without prior congressional approval, especially when the action is defensive or preemptive. U.S. troops are not committed to prolonged ground combat, or it's a time-sensitive and secretive planning process that is required for national security, such as what just happened. Was this time-sensitive? Probably checks the box. Was it secretive? Definitely checks the box.
Definitely.
But the War Powers Resolution of 1973 basically allows the president to order limited military operations as long as he notifies Congress within 48 hours of action and withdraws the forces within 60 days. So if troops are on the ground, they can only be there for a max of 60 days. He's got to alert Congress. They apparently alerted the top Congress members as the strikes are about to take place. And then they're supposed to be having a briefing for all of Congress, a classified briefing on Thursday, which is today, if you're listening to this on Thursday.
Yeah.
It was delayed from Tuesday. Anyways, intelligence and Pentagon officials are supposed to be briefed as well, and they all got briefed. But then the Democrats, some of them have been calling for Trump to be impeached, which is kind of probably a losing battle over these strikes. And supporters would say they would counter that by saying this did not amount to war and that Trump acted within his executive authority to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. They also highlight that past presidents have conducted similar actions. Think of Clinton in Kosovo, Obama in Libya, Biden in Syria. Presidents do this kind of often. So I think it's a losing battle. That being said, I do think it fits within the Constitution. But again, I'm not a legal expert.
Not a legal expert. Neither am I. Connor, thank you for that breakdown. We did get an awesome, thought-provoking it's definitely not a simple question to answer from one of our listeners, Wilson. Wilson, thank you for sending this in, and we're going to kind of jump into this conversation to wrap up the discussion. This came in as an Instagram DM to our Culture Brief podcast page. Follow us on Culture Brief Podcast. How do you feel Trump handled his speech was the first question, and how do you guys feel about us bombing Iran? How do you feel about the U.S. bombing Iran? And do you think we're justified in helping Israel? You go first, Connor.
Yeah, well, first off, I do think Trump's speech that he came out with Rubio, Hegseth, and Vance, and I think it sounded strong and had a flair of like confidence and strength, and I think it was short and sweet, just what it needed to be. As far as the next question, was it justified? I think in hindsight, given the success of the mission and the fact that there were no U.S. casualties, no shots fired other than us dropping the bombs, the damage done to Iran's nuclear facilities seems to be pretty good. Like they've really damaged them. I don't think it's hard to say that Trump maybe made a justified decision. That is not me fully saying that myself. I'm trying to picture how a lot of people are processing this. But I would also just say a lot of people would claim there's still concerns. Like, could this still boil over? We're just expecting Iran to just sit back, but they could still do things. They've even called for sleeper cells in America to awaken up. So if Americans are killed here on our own soil or elsewhere in the world, will the finger be pointed back towards Trump? I don't know. Maybe. And was this the U.S.'s place at all? This is technically a war that was initiated by Israel. They struck Iran first. Is it the U.S.'s spot to come in and support Israel in that way and do kind of their dirty work that they aren't able to do themselves? They did a lot of the front load work, but then they needed someone to come in and finish up the job. And then, I think a lot of people would say, yeah, it is justified because Iran has killed many Americans over the years. Who's to say that if they had a nuke, they wouldn't strike American facilities or especially Israel? They would very potentially try to hit Israel, but how many Americans would die in that? Or would they even ever try to strike American soil itself? I don't know. According to Axios, there was a leak that happened that suggested that the actual bombings did not destroy the facilities as much as Trump has said so. And the New York Times had this report, this classified report got leaked, and Axios said that leak infuriated the White House, right? Who's rejecting it as fake news and accused the anonymous official who leaked it of seeking to undermine Trump. This morning, as we're speaking now, Israeli intelligence services believe the strikes caused very significant damage to Iran's nuclear facilities. So that would help justify if it actually destroyed the facilities. Maybe it's justified. If it's just some damage and they're going to still be able to build a nuke, in fact, they might be even more encouraged to do so. I don't know. Maybe it's not. I will say that net approval of the strikes across America, according to a CNN poll this week, is negative 11 points. Mm-hmm. For comparison, in 2014, when Obama was striking ISIS targets quite a bit, those airstrikes were approved at plus 58 points. So I don't think this was necessarily a popular decision. Maybe that's because ISIS was seen as more of a threat to Americans themselves as opposed to Iran. And people are maybe just done with Middle East wars, and we just don't want to see this spill over. But what do you think, Micah?
Oh, Connor, this is definitely a tough one. So, first of all, his first question was on Trump's speech. I would say it was short and sweet, very Trump in what he said, but not very Trump because he actually stayed on point and on task. I tuned in to watch what he was going to say, and it wasn't long at all. It's just a few minutes. So, I give him props for that. Man, he has been on a Truth Social bender, though, in all hours of the night. Does he sleep, Connor?
I don't think so. In fact, I think some people have said he sleeps like 3 hours max a day.
Like, I just feel like he is at a blistering, unsustainable pace, but this is how he's always been, right? He just goes. He was the same way in his first term. So I give him props for the speech because I think he stayed on task. He just said very Trump things, but at the same time, he didn't veer off into other issues, which sometimes when he gets really fired up, he doesn't really drive his point home. He just talks about other things that actually have nothing to do with it. So I applaud him for just staying on task.
Well, there was no media there to ask questions. So
right.
They didn't
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah. You get somebody from CNN in there to rile him up. It might have gone a lot longer. Connor, I do think the strike on Iran can be justified from the American perspective and from the Israeli perspective, both in terms of standing with an ally and trying to prevent a hostile regime from getting nuclear weapons. Iran does have a long history of threatening Israel, the U.S., and it really did seem to set their nuclear program back even for a little while. So that matters. But at the same time, so for me, the question on justification, like if you're just going to ask me, is it justified? Yes, I think from the American perspective and supporting our main ally by a long shot in the Middle East is Israel. Like, take the spiritual debate out of it, which we can talk about all that too, right? The dispensationalism argument. But just as far as supporting an ally that is by far our best proxy in such a difficult region, but also, from the American perspective, they have been training for this specific mission. I mean, like I was reading how they've been training for this mission for a long time. They developed these mop bombs for something like this. That's why the Democratic Party has been kind of splintered on their reaction to this. I would say most have been against this, but at the same time, you got some people coming out saying, if any president, Bush, Obama, Biden, Trump, were given this opportunity, all of the training, all of the years, given the opportunity to drop this bomb and potentially wipe out a threat to Israel, to America, and to the world, that would at least be a difficult decision to make. I think that we can all agree on that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But at the same time, Connor, I don't think we'll really know if it was the right decision. So do I believe it's justified? Yes. Do I believe it's the right decision? I don't know. I don't know that yet.
Might be too early to tell. We'll just have to see if it boils over or if there's longer consequences years down the road.
That's why there's so many conflicting reports. We just don't know. So was it the right decision? Well, is this going to lead to a larger regional war? Right now it's looking like maybe not, but it very well could. Is this drawing in our biggest enemies into a fight against us, drawing us into a bigger war? Right now it doesn't look like it, but are we just delaying the inevitable? Like, did we just do this just to push off something that's going to happen anyway just by a year? You know what I mean? Yeah. So it just depends on your perspective on if this was the right thing. Now, if we zoom out as believers, Connor, we can't just react politically. We need to think biblically, and that's where my mind's been going to in this. We need discernment, a mind that isn't swayed just by headlines, by polls, by party lines. I am not a Democrat first. I am not a Republican first. I'm not even America first. Sorry, guys. I'm a follower of Jesus first and foremost. Above everything else. I belong to a kingdom that is eternal. No matter how great America is, I belong to the eternal kingdom. I belong to Jesus. And so that's just a reminder when we're thinking through this, and it must shape how we view every single thing. Our kingdom is anchored in the eternal, nothing else, and I'm grateful for that. That doesn't mean we can't be passionate about this. That doesn't mean that we can't care deeply about this. I know I do. I very much do. But it's a good reminder when we're overwhelmed or when we're getting off track, who we belong to, what our kingdom actually is. So Philippians 3:20 says, but our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await the Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. That verse resets everything for me when I'm thinking about this topic. It reminds me that my ultimate loyalty is not to country, not to a political leader, but to Christ. So while I understand why the strike happened, and I even agree with the tenets of it in a lot of ways personally, I want to make sure my heart stays grounded when I'm thinking and processing through this topic, not in fear, not in partisan politics, but in Jesus. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a political conflict. It's a part of a much bigger spiritual battle, which you actually highlighted, and which Jim Dennison and our entire team at Dennison Forum has done a really good job of focusing on, is that there's a larger spiritual battle at play here, and that's where I want to stay focused.
Yeah, and like you said, Dr. Jim Dennison, he wrote this week in a great article.
Yes.
This is ultimately a spiritual war. Ephesians 6:12-13 says as much when we have spiritual wars, that we are against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, and we are to stand firm. And then verse 18 says we should be praying at all times in the Spirit. So if you're looking for some prayer points, here's a few for you. Let's first and foremost pray for lasting peace in the Middle East, a true and just and lasting peace. And then let's pray for believers in Iran. There's a lot of Christians in Iran who are caught up in this and would obviously they want the gospel to spread and take away this just horrible regime that has got so much going on with Sharia law and everything to govern their country. So let's pray for believers in Iran to boldly proclaim the mystery of the gospel. Let's pray for the conversion of Iranian leaders. Let's pray for spiritual awakening to advance across the Middle East. And let's pray for Americans to place our hope ultimately in the God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all.
Amen.
This was a very big topic. This is probably the biggest thing we've had to discuss since we started this podcast. This is extreme consequences either way based off of how an operation goes. Could this have spilled into war? Could it still? Yes. And so we've taken a lot of time to talk about this. So thank you all for listening with us as we've tried to inform you guys and process ourselves, as well as help you guys process and think critically and biblically about how to approach this subject, because there's a lot of moving pieces here and a lot happening. So yeah, this was a lot of great stuff. Thank you, Micah, for the details there. And hopefully you guys all come away more informed. And we'll just see what happens. I mean, last week, we could not have told you exactly how that whole operation was going to play out, but it played out the way it did. And here we are a week later talking about it. So we don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, more could just happen. There's a NATO conference going on right now, and Trump's feeling big and strong there, and he's getting great conversations done there. But yeah, thank you guys. And let's jump real fast, Micah, into the mailbag. Okay, guys, we want to continue to hear from you all. Thank you, Wilson, for sending in that question. If you have a question, send it in. Send us your thoughts at culturebrief@dennisonforum.org or shoot us a message on Instagram at Culture Brief Podcast. One other comment that we got this week, this was on a Spotify comment. Josh said, "Gentlemen, you've got it all wrong." And he's referencing our discussion last week on weed eating and the direction we go on that. Again, I cannot believe how many times we've talked about lawn stuff here. Anyways, he said, "I speak with credibility from being on a college campus grounds crew. The only correct way to walk when weed eating is in the direction that the trimmer rotates. This increases the efficiency of the trimming and prevents debris from being thrown towards you." End of discussion. Josh making it very clear what he thinks there. Obviously, he's got some scientific data to back that up. Go in the direction of the trimmer.
How long did he work on this college grounds crew? You know what I mean? Anyway, thank you for your comment. Who knows? Who knows? It sounds like he's coming out rebuking me. So, we're just going to move on.
Okay. Micah, I think you had a question about fast dining or casual dining, something, right?
Okay. So we're going to do like a little poll question for all of you. So you'll see this poll blasted out, and then we'll report the results next week. But I just found this really interesting. I saw somebody else do a poll on this, but I kind of changed up the restaurant. So, Connor, which is your favorite casual dining chain? Audience, the faithful listeners of Culture Brief Podcast, what is your favorite casual dining chain? I picked the most popular ones across the country that are located pretty much everywhere. So hopefully everybody kind of can have an opinion on this matter no matter where you live. So again, the question is, which is your favorite casual dining chain? Olive Garden, Applebee's, Chili's, Cracker Barrel, Texas Roadhouse, the Cheesecake Factory. I'll say them one more time. Olive Garden, Applebee's, Chili's, Cracker Barrel, Texas Roadhouse, and the Cheesecake Factory. I'll go ahead and jump in. By far, my favorite is Chili's. If you know me personally, you know me and my wife love Chili's. We always have. We always will. Don't sleep on the chips and salsa. Don't sleep on the chips and skillet queso. And they got a lot of really great bundle deals for lunch and dinner. You can get out of there. Both of you eat, have a good entree, have a soda for under $20 for two people. In this economy, head on down to Chili's.
Okay. Yeah. Chili's is not good. Their salsa is literally flavorless. It's just red. I don't even know how to explain it.
I knew this would upset Connor.
Chili's is
I knew that would upset Connor.
If this is me, I don't love any of these places. I don't like chain restaurants. I like places that have more flavor and flair to them.
You act like you have such an elevated palate.
If I was going to go to one of these places, I'm choosing Club B's, Applebee's all the way. It's cheap. You can go there. They got reverse happy hour. Get some cheap, maybe just warmed
You come
up
at
wings.
me for Chili's,
If
and
I'm
then you
gonna
pick
choose one of them-
Applebee's?
Well, Applebee's is even cheaper than Chili's. So if I'm going to go to one of them, I'm at least going to go there and know that what I'm getting is not good food.
Oh,
I'm
my
doing the same thing
goodness.
at Chili's.
Okay.
Anyways, you guys
Okay.
can vote on Spotify if you're listening there, or go to our Instagram and I'll post a poll later this week.
Please, we want lots of votes on this. We want a say. Again, Olive Garden, Applebee's, Chili's, Cracker Barrel, Texas Roadhouse, or the Cheesecake Factory.
I think I know which one's going to win. Everybody loves one of these restaurants, but we'll reserve that for next week. Okay,
Which
Michael,
one is your favorite? Yep. Go
Let's
ahead.
pop into our check-in here because we got several things to update you guys on. Okay, I don't know if you've seen this, Micah, how much you followed it, the Karen Reed trial up in Boston. Big deal. A lot of people were following this on socials, but also there was a documentary that came out earlier this year. I watched that, found the case to be very interesting. Karen Reed was acquitted of all the major charges relating to the death of her boyfriend, who was a Boston police officer. His name was John O'Keefe. He was found dead in the snow, essentially, and it peeled off into this massive case that potentially involves corruption and cover-up from the police department. And now that's obviously being more seen as the possibility now that Karen Reed's been acquitted, because they were saying that she killed him. Anyways, we'll see if this spills out into more, because it's something like out of a book or a TV series, essentially. But she's acquitted. She's now been to trial twice and is acquitted. Anyways, a lot of people were asking about that. I had several people in person say, hey, will you guys mention that on the show? And I was like, yeah, it is interesting. So there's that. LSU won the College World Series. They beat DBU in the round one, and I feel better about that, knowing that they ended up going on to win.
Yeah.
They were by far the best team in the series. And also, did you see in game two, they won in 2 games out of 3 against Coastal Carolina. Game 2, though, the coach of Coastal Carolina was literally ejected from the game in the first inning.
Bad move. Bad move. That coach would need to commit, in my opinion, a heinous act of violence. And you watch back, that's not what happened. In order to be kicked out in game 2 of a 3-game series in the College World Series, like the entire season, the entire championship hinges on this moment. This, to me, looks like an umpire who was, I don't know, just a little bit too full of himself. I think that was absolutely uncalled for.
Yeah, definitely bizarre. Anyways, congratulations to the Tigers. Go Tigers.
Go Tigers. Okay,
Yeah.
So the Oklahoma City Thunder are NBA champions. They won Game 7. The Pacers put up an awesome fight. Tyrese Halliburton is a great story. But again, like we talked about, OKC has built a team from the ground up. Sam Presti is an incredibly impressive general manager who completely rebuilt that team and invigorated that city. Good for the Thunder. We're happy for them. I predicted Indiana to win in 6. Connor predicted OKC to win in 5. So Connor was more right. I just need to stop making these picks with my heart and actually use my head, because I just wanted the Pacers to win.
You picked wrong on the Stanley Cup and
I
this.
did.
I will say, I think it would have potentially gone Indiana's way had Halliburton not ruptured his
Not got
Achilles
down in the first quarter with that injury.
Yeah, that was really sad.
Right, exactly.
Okay, guys, we got a few things for y'all to tune into, and we'll keep you guys updated on these things. But one is the big, beautiful bill. July 4th is the self-imposed deadline to pass Trump's bill that he once passed with all of his legislation in there. They set themselves up for a July 4th deadline. So we'll see if they can actually meet that. They're supposed to vote. There's a lot of debating and back and forth happening in the halls of Congress right now, trying to change language. So we'll keep you guys posted on that.
And definitely want to give more detail as that comes. It's been kind of the same update for the last month, because we have talked about this bill quite a bit, but we definitely want to dive into it, especially if it does pass by the deadline or if it doesn't. We'll kind of get into the weeds a little bit of you guys are like what the sticking points are, but it just keeps changing. It's not worth diving into fully yet. But literally they're saying you're not going home for the July 4th holiday. You're not getting a break until this bill passes. So, a lot at stake here. So let's see what happens. Okay, we've got the New York City mayoral race. So Zohran Mamdani shocked the political world by winning the long shot bid to be the Democratic nominee in the mayoral election in November, where he is projected to win. However, if you read a lot of these stories today about this 33-year-old socialist who won the mayoral spot in New York City, technically he did not. It's just, a Democrat going up against a Republican.
He's now the front runner.
And an independent in New York City. Okay, the Democrat's probably going to win. And Mamdani beat out Andrew Cuomo, who was the former New York governor, who was backed by establishment Democrats, centrist Democrats, and big donors, and represented, a lot of what the Democratic Party is kind of starting to shift to, but Cuomo had a lot of his own skeletons in the closet. But Mamdani was supported by AOC, Bernie Sanders, and he is pushing a bold, upfront socialist agenda.
I liked what this one Politico reporter said on Twitter last night, Sally Goldberg. She said Cuomo had a universal name ID, a $25 million PAC backing him, and tons of institutional endorsements, of course, the just background of being the governor. And Mandani is a 33-year-old socialist. The magnitude of this election cannot be overstated.
Yeah. It's actually unbelievable. There's a lot of shockwaves this is going to send through the Democratic Party as they're searching for an identity. Some people might be in the Republican Party right now trying to find their own identity too, because they don't like the way that it's headed under Trump, right? So there's this concept of the Democrats are like, all right, what's our play? How do we beat Trump or MAGA in 2028? Do we swing way far left, or do we try to come to the center? My guess is, I don't know. It's a tough call because New York City is not going to represent how most Americans feel. So it's interesting to see what strategy will come out of this.
But I do think
the Democrats.
Most Americans feel the cost of living is still really high. And so that's what he spoke to. And I also think he's young, and he used the internet and social media and TikTok and Twitter and everything to do this campaign.
He did.
That reached voters.
He ran a good campaign.
So the Democrats
no doubt.
may want to take a page out of that book and get away from establishment style and commercials and stuff and do this. I mean, this is potentially how Trump won. Get on podcasts, be on social, all of that. Also, his policies are just interesting. I mean, he's venturing into communist territory he wants to do $10 billion in new taxes from corporations and wealthy to support government-run grocery stores, rent freezes, and free buses. So, yeah, that's popular to a lot of people who think cost of living is really high. But
but that's got Soviet Union written all over it. Goodness
they're
gracious.
not contemplating the actual effects of how that's going to happen.
Right.
Anyways,
right.
We'll keep tabs on that. That election is in November, and if he becomes mayor, it's going to be interesting. Another thing happening this weekend, Jeff Bezos, Lauren Sanchez, richest couple in the world, or third richest, maybe second, third. They're getting married in Venice. It's got a lot of protests going on. Anyways, it's going to be a who's who of who's there. So I'm sure we'll see lots of images on social media this weekend with Leo DiCaprio, Mick Jagger, Kim Kardashian, Oprah, Orlando Bloom, Ivanka Trump, all these celebrities, big politicians, big business people. They're all going to be there. Micah, get this. The estimates suggest that this wedding may cost between $64 and $76 million.
Chump change for Bezos, man. Chump change for Bezos. Man, what an unbelievable story, because, there's, like you said, there are a lot of protests happening there of how it's just like taking over the entire city. But yeah, I mean, this has been a big story just for a wedding. But you know what? You spend that much money on it, I guess you're probably hoping that it's a big story. Okay, last thing. Cooper Flagg to the Mavs with the number 1 pick. So the Dallas Mavericks, we talked about this before, got the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. We're, again, recording on Wednesday morning, June 25th. The draft will happen tonight. So when this episode releases, everybody knows where the picks will fall. It's a foregone conclusion that the Mavericks are going to draft Cooper Flagg. But this is a big turnaround, a big glimmer of hope for the Dallas Mavericks, who Nico Harrison and the entire organization were dragged through the mud after they traded a generational superstar and broke all of our hearts in Luka Doncic. So the NBA draft is tonight. We'll know the results by the time the episode is released.
Irving re-signed. Now he's back. He's going to stick with the Mavs too.
Right.
He likes the idea of playing with Flagg. A lot of people do. So
exactly.
And Kevin Durant now in Houston. So we got all these big stars hanging out in Texas. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Culture Brief, Denison Forum podcast. All the articles, any social posts that we mentioned, everything will be linked in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, rate, review, and share with a friend, and go vote on our polls. And we will see you next Thursday.
See you soon.